Okay, so we have this notion of constitutional rights. Pretty much every American, I assume, has heard that term, right? My constitutional rights. And there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of constitutional rights. First of all, as I've discussed in other videos, that constitutional rights are a limit on the power of government. They're not an affirmative license, right, for people to do certain things. They limit the power of government to interfere with people, people's lives, people's expression, people's thoughts, etc., all that. And another common misperception is that to be a constitutional right, the right has to be listed in the Constitution. So there is a list of rights in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, but there's also an entire body of law about fundamental constitutional rights that are not even listed or mentioned in the Constitution. Some of them most judges agree on, right, and some of them, there's a split on whether, certain rights should be regarded as constitutionally protected, even if they're not mentioned in the Constitution. Now, before getting into the textual basis, right, for courts to find that there are unlisted, unenumerated, right, lawyers use this word unenumerated, which means unlisted. Sometimes I wish we just used the simpler language, but there is a textual basis for finding the existence of unenumerated or unlisted rights, as my dog Lainey has decided that this is the time to play with her football. But I want to touch on, before we get to the textual basis for finding unenumerated rights, some of this is kind of deep in the weeds, right? But I really think it's helpful to understand, it was certainly helpful for me to understand unenumerated rights, to study some of the philosophical underpinnings, right, of this whole idea of people having natural rights, right, that are protected, right, and that are immune, right, from governmental interference. No discussion of that, of the philosophical underpinnings, right, of the existence of these natural rights, these unlisted, broad swath of rights that people enjoy, right, that are immune from governmental interference. No discussion of that is complete without a discussion and some understanding of the philosophy of John Locke. John Locke was a political philosopher whose thinking clearly influenced the founders, right, and the authors of the Constitution, particularly, as I'll discuss at another time, the people who wrote the 9th and 10th Amendments, right, and the language that's used in those amendments. Here's the theory of John Locke in a nutshell. And again, I think it's really crucial to understand this before launching into any study of what, right, unenumerated constitutional rights should be honored by courts. John Locke's theory was basically called social, I've heard it referred to as social compact or social contract. Compact is probably the best word, the better of those two, because we're not really talking about an exchange of mutual promises here. We're talking about society coming together, right, with a common understanding of how things are going to work. I've written several pieces that revolve around the thinking of John Locke, and here's basically how it goes. Under this social compact theory, right, the question Locke was trying to answer is, why would anybody enter into a system where they subjugated themselves, right, to the power, the authority of some government above them? And to explain that, he said that in a state of nature, that's how he put it, in a state of nature, right, just, no society. We're talking about people, right, stripped of all of the institutions around us and the customs around us and all of that. That in a state of nature, every person is his or her own sovereign. Now, of course, in the time of John Locke, right, he didn't talk about women, he talked about men. But obviously, a modern understanding of Locke's thinking, that would apply to any individual. So that every person in a state of nature is his or her own sovereign. In other words, and sovereign means, right, I have sole jurisdiction over my life, right? There is nobody who has power over my property, my liberty, right, and my freedom to live my life as I choose. That's in a state of nature, right? Each one. Now, the problem, Locke says, with the state of nature is it's a dangerous place, right? It's a dangerous place out there, because you can't count on the goodwill, right, of everybody around you, right, who's also sovereign, and you certainly can't count on them not wanting what you have. So Locke's theory was that people enter into a society, right, and form a government and he often referred to that as the legislature, right? The legislative power, right? The lawmaking power. So people form a society with a legislature, right? With lawmaking institutions in order to secure their property and their freedom. It's an interesting idea, right? They don't they don't form into a society and join together. That's why we call it a social compact, right? They don't join together to give up, right, their property and their freedom. They join together to preserve their property and their freedom. Now, John Locke, this is really important language, right, talked about power that is ceded, C-E-D-E-D, right, power that we cede to the government, right, over society, and power that is retained by the people. And the way this theory goes, again, and it's not just John Locke, it's other people who wrote about John Locke. One of them, was a political activist named Brutus, or who wrote under the name Brutus. And together they formed, right, again, when you look back at history, they formed this theory. The only power, as this thinking goes, that an individual, right, and we're talking about individuals, because John Locke talked about each individual, right? The only power any individual person would cede to the government would be that power that is necessary, right, to protect us. Things, there are a couple ways to look at this. The crux of it is that we give to the government power to do anything that we can't do alone, right? Some things that need to be achieved, right? Things that need to be done that we can't do individually. For example, roadways, right? If we're going to build roads and sidewalks, do we want to live in a society where every individual is responsible for paving the road right in front of that person's house or in front of that person's business? Or do we want to do that collectively, right, as a society? There's a, in the founding generation, there was a common saying, right, a person cannot be a judge in his or her own cause, right? You need people to resolve disputes, right? We need neutral arbiters to do that. We need to work together to provide a common defense, right? If Kim Jong-un is coming for us, we don't all want to run to the dresser and get the 22 out, right? And that's every person for himself or herself. So there are things that we cannot accomplish, right, unless we do them together. It's also a good idea, right, under this theory, sometimes for the government to provide for the common good, right, when that's necessary, right? And so the idea here is, if it's something that we can't do, right, without some common lift, right, or some common surge, if it's something that requires the collective, right, or if it's some kind of a benefit, right, that's designed to improve the lives of the people, and each person, right, under the jurisdiction of the government is benefiting somehow from that. Under those circumstances, right, a person has ceded authority to the government and is subject to certain rules, right, that we all have to follow. But a couple of really important caveats. Number one, under Lockean theory, right, and John Locke himself wrote this, an individual person cannot cede to the government any power that that person did not have to begin with. Okay, for me to give power or jurisdiction to the government, that has to be power or jurisdiction that I possessed to begin with. And what Locke said was, one person does not have authority or power over the life of another, right? Another person's private affairs, another person's pursuit of happiness, another person's property, right? Those are things that I have no jurisdiction over. And therefore, I cannot give to the government, right, the authority to burden that other person. I didn't have that authority to begin with. So I do not give to the government, right, the authority to tell people how to live their lives, because I didn't have, right, I didn't have that power to give. So that's an important caveat. Number one, again, you as an individual cannot give to the government. You cannot cede to to society or to a common common legislature. You cannot give it any power that you didn't have to begin with, and that power does not include arbitrary control over other people's lives and affairs. Second, the only power, and this is where Brutus really added on to Lockean theory, right? The author who wrote under the name Brutus. the only power that an individual can be presumed to have ceded to the government is that power, right, that authority, that jurisdiction that is absolutely necessary for the common good, right? Again, that theme runs through Lockean theory. Okay, after all, why would I give up more control over my own life than I would have to? It doesn't make any sense. Now, so Lockean theory sort of assumes a human impulse to want to be free, right? As the Statue of Liberty says on it, that we yearn to be free. In that sense, he's not entirely accurate. There's a large portion of the human population, any psychologist will tell you, that does not long to be free. And that's called authoritarianism. And authoritarianism we often associate with just the leader, right, who's an authority figure. But authoritarianism is also an impulse on the part of people who derive all of their sense of value and worth and power, right, from being associated with a strong leader. So it's not just the leader, but it's the led, right, who have this authoritarian impulse. But in a country that styles itself a free country, like the United States, and like we were supposed to, the founders wanted us to be, certainly you cannot indulge the supposition that people yearn to be subjugated. So again, Lockean theory, right, assumes that a person wants to be free, which means that a person would not give to the government, would not cede to the government or to society any power over himself or herself that is not necessary to be parted with. So to review a little bit here, two big ideas, right? Number one, we cannot give to the government power that any individual cannot give to the government power that individual didn't have to begin with, and that does not include arbitrary control over other people's lives. And number two, that no individual should be presumed to have given the government any more power than is absolutely necessary. So the bottom line is the government only has the power to act for the common good and does not have the power to control, right, in an arbitrary way, individual lives. Okay, so those are the two big ideas, right? The two big words that you want to take away are the words ceded, and this is a review of what I've already said, but the word cede, C-E-D-E, and a word I haven't mentioned too often, but it's absolutely critical, the word retained, right? So I cede to the government that authority, right, that jurisdiction, that power over my life, and only that power over my life that is necessary for the common good, right? I cede power that the government needs, right, for the common good. All of the rest, that which is a lot, okay, all of the rest of the power, the jurisdiction, right, over my life, the authority over me, is retained by me, right? So keep that word in your head, right, the word retained. So one more time, we enter into a social compact. This is Lockean theory. We enter into a social compact. We do give up some of our freedom, right, in order to secure our liberty and our property. But we cannot give to the government what we didn't have, and we only give the government what we have to. Right, that means that we cede some limited jurisdiction, right, over life to the state, to the government. The rest is retained by the people. So we will see how that factors into some of the constitutional text, right, coming in the next video. I think you'll agree when we talk about that text that reading that text without this context, right, historically and philosophically, would be very difficult to understand, right, where the authors of that were coming from. Where they were coming from was Lockean theory. So we'll see you for the next one. Stay safe and stay tuned.